The blue martini smelled of stale gin and cold desperation. Zara Williams swirled her third glass of cheap Merlot, watching the snow bleed against the window in rhythmic white streaks. Outside, Manhattan glowed with a festive joy that felt like a physical slap to her face. 2 weeks ago, she had a fiancé and a life. Tonight, she had a cracked bar stool and a crushing hollow in her chest where her heart used to be. Then he sat down. He was all sharp edges and tailored charcoal wool, a silhouette of lethal grace in a sea of tacky holiday sweaters. Zara didn't think. She just felt the ache of being invisible. Loneliness was a fever, and this man looked like the ice. "It's almost midnight," she whispered, her voice thin and brittle. "I don't want to be alone when the clock strikes. Please, kiss me?" The stranger's eyes, dark and bottomless, searched hers. A slow, amused smirk tugged at his lips, sharp as a razor. "Close your eyes, Zara." He hadn't asked her name, yet it rolled off his tongue like a secret. When his mouth finally met hers, the world dissolved into a haze of expensive whiskey, winter air, and a dangerous, electric heat that promised to burn her alive. The kiss was perfect, but as he pulled away, the predatory glint in his eyes suggested that Zara hadn't just found a stranger, she'd caught a predator. Thank you for watching, my loves. If you believe some mistakes are worth making, hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments, would you have been bold enough to ask a stranger for a midnight kiss? Let me know where you're watching from. The phantom of his kiss clung to Zara's lips like a brand, a heat that wouldn't dissipate even in the frigid Harlem morning. For 48 hours, she'd moved through her rounds at the youth center like a ghost. She was a social worker, a woman who specialized in mending the jagged edges of broken lives, but she'd never encountered a man who felt so entirely, lethally whole. In her cramped studio, the radiator clanked a rhythmic, dying breath against the winter chill. She sat before the harsh blue glow of her laptop. She shouldn't have been searching. A midnight kiss in a dive bar was meant to be a fleeting mercy, a temporary bandage for the hole her fiancé had ripped into her life. But the way he had whispered her name low, like smoke over gravel, gnawed at her marrow. She began with the basics, but handsome Korean man yielded nothing but stock photos. It was when she searched the history of the shipping containers at the Brooklyn Pier that a name finally surfaced in a leaked investigative report. Kang Jihoon. Her blood turned to slush. The screen displayed a grainy, black and white photo of him leaving a courthouse. There were no smiles here. He was a statue of ice surrounded by men with surgical silences, their suits costing more than her yearly salary, their eyes empty. The articles didn't call him a businessman. They called him the architect of the New York Korean underworld, a man whose import-export empire was built on the bones of those who dared to look him in the eye. Zara stared at the screen, her breath hitching. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch she'd found tucked there after she left the bar. Inside lay a delicate gold anklet, cold and heavy. He hadn't just kissed her. He had marked her. Her phone suddenly chimed a notification from her building's security app. A sleek, black sedan had been idling outside her front door for the last 6 hours. The lonely stranger was no longer a ghost. He was the hunter, and she was the only prey he wanted. Thank you for staying with me, my loves. If you've ever followed a curiosity you knew would lead to heartbreak, hit like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you found out your mystery man was a monster. Would you run, or would you stay for the thrill? Let's see who the brave ones are. The air in the Harlem Youth Center was thick with the scent of floor wax and the damp wool of children's coats. Marcus, Zara's best friend and moral compass, leaned against her desk, his expression a mask of mounting concern. He didn't look at her. He looked at the window, where the black sedan sat like a silent, predatory beast. That car has followed you from the bodega to the center, Zara, Marcus whispered, his voice vibrating with a tremor he couldn't hide. That's not a secret admirer. That's a death sentence in a tailored suit. Do you know who that man is? I've heard stories about the Kang organization. They don't just run the docks, they own the shadows. Zara clutched her lukewarm coffee, the paper cup buckling under her grip. He kissed me. Marcus. It didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like being seen. You work with kids who are in the system because of men like him? Marcus snapped, finally meeting her eyes. You were one of those kids. Don't let a lonely Christmas Eve turn you into a victim of your own desperation. Run. Now. But as Marcus left, Zara felt a different kind of chill. She pulled up the internal records of a former ward, a boy who had disappeared after witnessing a deal at the Brooklyn Pier. The name associated with the cleanup was Kang Jihoon. He wasn't just a boss, he was a ghost who erased people. She should have been packing her bags, fleeing to a different zip code. Instead, her fingers traced the gold anklet beneath her jeans. Would you have listened to Marcus and run? Or is the pull of the unknown too strong to resist? Hit like if you've ever stayed when you knew you should have left. Tell me in the comments, can a monster truly change for the right woman? The door to the center creaked open. It wasn't a child or a worried parent. A man in a sharp, slate-gray suit stepped in, bowing slightly. He held a small white lily, a flower of mourning and rebirth. "Mr. Kang is waiting for you, Miss Williams. He says the wine at the bar was beneath you. He would like to offer you something more substantial." The black sedan didn't feel like a car. It felt like a silent, leather-lined confessional. Zara sat in the back, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs, as the neon lights of Manhattan blurred into streaks of liquid fire. They pulled up to an unassuming, high-end gallery in Chelsea. The man in the slate-gray suit, Jihoon's second in command, she realized opened the door with a precision that was chilling. Inside, the gallery was a cavern of white marble and haunting, minimalist art. Standing in the center, back turned to her, was Kang Jihoon. He had traded the wool coat for a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and the faint, jagged edge of a scar. "You spent 4 Christmases alone, Zara," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to hum through the floorboards. He didn't turn around yet. "The first after your parents decided their pride was more important than their daughter. 3 more after a man who didn't deserve you walked away." "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned then. His eyes weren't cold, they were consuming. "Because I don't let things I want remain mysteries. I know you work for $60,000 a year to save children who are often beyond saving. I know you eat cold noodles at midnight. And I know that when you kissed me, you weren't looking for a stranger. You were looking for a reason to stay." He stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco enveloping her. He reached out, his thumb grazing her lower lip where the memory of him still burned. "I am a dangerous man, Zara, but I am also a man who rewards loyalty. I want to offer you a different life. A job as a consultant for my foundation, real money, real power to change those kids' lives. And in return, you stay by my side." Would you have taken the offer? Hit like if you think you'd be strong enough to walk away from a man like Jihoon. Tell me in the comments, is it really a choice when the man offering it looks at you like you're his entire world? Jihoon's hand dropped to her waist, pulling her flush against him. "But know this," he hissed against her ear. "Once you enter my world, the only way out is through me." The air in the gallery felt thin, as if Jihoon were consuming all the oxygen in the room. Zara stared at the folder he held out, not a contract, but a deed. It was the deed to the Harlem Youth Center. The city was going to sell it to a developer in February, Jihoon said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he'd shown at the bar. "Your at-risk kids would have been on the street. Marcus would have been unemployed. And you? You would have moved back to your parents, begging for the respectability they used to choke you." Zara's breath hitched. It was a surgical strike. He had found the one thing she couldn't walk away from, the only family she had left. He was offering her the power to be the savior she never had when she was a ward of the state, but the price was written in the cold, hard lines of his face. "Why me?" she whispered, her hands trembling as they hovered over the folder. "You could have any woman. You could buy 10 centers. Because when you kissed me, you didn't see the boss. You saw the man." He stepped into her personal space, his heat radiating through her thin coat. "And because you're the only person in this city who looked into my soul and didn't flinch. I don't want a woman who fears me, Zara. I want a woman who understands why I do what I must." He took her hand, his fingers tracing the pulse point at her wrist. It was erratic, a frantic drumming that gave away her terror and her desire. He pressed the deed into her palm, his touch a velvet shackle. "Accept the position. Save your children. Be mine." Would you have taken the offer? Hit like if you think you'd be strong enough to walk away from a man who offers you everything you've ever prayed for. Tell me in the comments, is it a gift if it comes from a monster, or just a more expensive cage? Zara looked at the deed, then up at the man who was effectively buying her soul with a smile. "What happens if I say no?" "I don't think you will," he murmured, leaning down until his lips brushed her ear. "You've been hungry for a long time, Zara. It's time you learned how it feels to be full." The transition from the salt-stained streets of Harlem to the gilded interior of Cheongryong was like stepping through a tear in reality. The private club was a subterranean masterpiece of dark wood, crimson silk, and the scent of expensive cologne and old money. Here, the air was heavy with the low murmur of Korean and the sharp clink of crystal. Zara felt like a fraying thread in a tapestry of silk. She was dressed in a gown Jihoon had sent midnight blue silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. Beside her, Jihoon moved with the predatory ease of a king returning to his throne. He didn't hold her hand. He kept his palm pressed firmly against the small of her back, a possessive weight that warned everyone in the room she was his. "This is the world you've entered," he whispered, his voice a low hum against the backdrop of a traditional gayagium playing a haunting melody. Beauty on the surface, steel beneath, a sharp-featured woman with a bob as lethal as a blade approached. This was Minji, Jihoon's cousin and second in command. Her eyes raked over Zara with cold, calculating disdain. "She's soft, Jihoon," Minji said in rapid Korean, though her eyes never left Zara's. "A social worker. She'll break before the first snow melts." "She's stronger than you think," Jihoon replied in English, his grip tightening on Zara. Suddenly, the music cut. Two men dragged a bloodied figure through the back service entrance. The contrast was a physical blow, the luxury of the lounge met with the raw, metallic scent of fresh blood. The club didn't stop. People didn't scream. They simply turned their heads, their expressions indifferent. Zara's stomach lurched. This was her first moral compromise, standing in silk while a man was broken 10 feet away. This is the moment the veil drops. If you've ever seen a side of someone that terrified you but you couldn't look away, hit like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, would you have turned your back on the violence, or demanded answers? Let's see who prefers the truth, no matter how bloody. Jihoon didn't flinch. He looked at Zara, his expression unreadable. "He stole from the foundation you now run, Zara. Should I be merciful, or should I be a businessman?" The music resumed a jaunty, hollow jazz, but the metallic tang of blood remained in the back of Zara's throat. Jihoon led her to a private alcove, his hand never leaving her skin. The heat of him felt like a brand, a constant reminder that she had traded her autonomy for the survival of those she loved. She was no longer just a social worker. She was a variable in a very dangerous equation. "You didn't answer," Jihoon said, pouring a glass of amber liquid that smelled of peat and smoke. "Mercy or business, Zara. You're a part of this now. Your center is funded by the very business you find distasteful. Every meal those kids eat, every book they read, is paid for by the blood you see on the floor." Zara looked at the gold anklet, glinting under the dim, red lights. "You didn't give me a choice. You gave me a hostage situation disguised as a gift." Jihoon leaned in, his face inches from hers. "In this world, everything is a trade. I gave you the center. I gave you safety. In return, I want your loyalty. Not the kind you give to a job, but the kind you give to a god." He pulled a small silver locket from his pocket. Inside was a faded photo of a young girl with a bright, innocent smile. "This was Hannah, my sister. She believed in mercy too. It got her buried in a nameless grave. I don't permit mercy anymore, Zara. I permit survival." As he spoke, he took her hand and pressed it against his chest. Beneath the fine silk of his shirt, his heart beat with a slow, terrifyingly steady rhythm. He wasn't a monster because he was cold. He was a monster because he was so incredibly, dangerously alive. The first moral compromise is always the hardest. If you've ever found yourself making excuses for the person you love, hit like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, at what point does the cost of a gift become too high to pay? Suddenly, the heavy doors of the alcove burst open. Minji appeared, her face pale, a rare crack in her icy composure. "Jihoon, Sangmin's men. They aren't just at the docks anymore. They've found her apartment. They're tearing it apart, looking for her." The elevator surged toward the clouds, leaving the blood and silk of the club far below. Jihoon's private penthouse was a temple of glass and obsidian, suspended over a Manhattan that wept in neon. Zara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a ghost against the rain-streaked skyline. Everything she owned, her journals, her thrift store quilts, the few photos of a family that had forgotten her, was currently being shredded by men she didn't know. "You're safe here," Jihoon said. His voice was no longer a command. It was smoke over gravel, heavy with a weariness he only showed the dark. He walked toward her, shedding his jacket. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had been at war for too long. He stopped inches behind her. The scent of rain and expensive sandalwood enveloped her, a sensory cage that felt more like a sanctuary. "They took everything, Jihoon," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My life is gone." "Your life was a series of people taking from you until you had nothing left to give," he murmured, his hands hovering near her waist but not touching. "Not yet. I am not taking from you, Zara. I am clearing the wreckage." He turned her around, his fingers gently lifting her chin. In the dim light, his eyes were no longer predatory. They were filled with a haunting, mirrored loneliness. He told her then, about the nights after Hana died, how he had built this empire of stone just to feel something solid in a world that had turned to ash. "I don't know how to be the man you want," he admitted, a rare tremor of vulnerability in his touch. "But I know I will burn this city to the ground before I let them touch a hair on your head." The chemistry is undeniable, but is it worth the cost? Subscribe if you're feeling this tension too. Tell me in the comments, would you feel safe or suffocated in a gilded cage like this? His lips brushed hers, not the impulsive kiss of a stranger, but the slow, agonizing heat of a man claiming his destiny. In the shadow of the storm, Zara realized she wasn't just falling for a man. She was falling for the darkness he kept at bay. The silence in the penthouse was surgical, engineered to keep the chaos of Manhattan at bay. In the dim glow of the kitchen, the scent of jasmine tea rose in delicate steam-curled ribbons. Jihoon stood at the counter, his movements precise and strangely domestic, as he poured the brew into 2 ceramic cups. The harsh light of the under-cabinet LEDs caught the faded ink of a tattoo on his inner wrist, a small, elegant crane, the Korean symbol for longevity and peace. "My mother made this for me whenever the nightmares got too loud," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet. He pushed a cup toward Zara. "She didn't know the things I did to keep the family fed, or perhaps she chose not to know." Zara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, her fingers still trembling from the adrenaline of the night. "And you? Did you choose this life? Or did it choose you?" Jihoon walked around the counter, stopping so close she could feel the radiating heat of his body. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of a scar near his collarbone, a jagged reminder of a blade that had come too close. "When you are born into a storm, you don't choose the rain. You just decide whether to drown or learn to swim." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. For a second, the mask of the boss slipped, revealing a man who was exhausted by his own power. "Everyone wants something from me, Zara. My men want strength. My enemies want my head. My mother wants a son who doesn't exist anymore. But you just asked for a kiss." He didn't wait for her answer. He claimed her mouth with a desperate, starving intensity that spoke of years of isolation. In the heart of his gilded cage, Zara realized she wasn't just his obsession, he was becoming hers. But as his hand slid down to her waist, the intercom chimed a sharp, discordant sound that shattered the intimacy. "Boss!" Minji's voice crackled through the speaker, cold and urgent. "Sangmin didn't just hit her apartment. He's at the youth center. He's looking for Marcus." The ride to Harlem was a blur of wet asphalt and predatory speed. Jihoon didn't speak. His silence was surgical, engineered, and terrifying. The man who had touched Zara with a ghost of a tremor minutes ago was gone, replaced by a kingpin whose eyes were as cold as a shallow grave. In his hand, a black semi-automatic looked like a natural extension of his arm. When they arrived, the youth center, Zara's sanctuary, was a wound in the night. The windows were jagged teeth of broken glass. The scent of cordite and expensive cologne hung in the frigid air, clashing with the familiar smell of floor wax. "Stay in the car," Jihoon commanded, his voice smoke over gravel. Zara didn't listen. She couldn't. She scrambled out, her heels clicking like a countdown on the pavement. Inside, the scene was a tableau of brutality. Marcus was on his knees, blood blooming like a dark carnation on his white shirt. Standing over him was Lee Sangmin, a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes that lit up with a sick delight when he saw Zara. "The social worker," Sangmin purred, his Korean accent thick and mocking. "Jihoon, you've gotten sentimental. You forgot that anything you love is just leverage I haven't used yet." Before Zara could scream, Jihoon moved. He was a shadow in motion, a blur of lethal grace. He didn't just fight, he dismantled. The sound of bone snapping was sickeningly crisp in the quiet room. He struck one of Sangmin's men with his weapon's butt, blood spraying across the colorful murals of the children's playroom. This is the moment everything changes. If you need to know what happens next, You know what to do. Hit that subscribe button if you're holding your breath. Tell me in the comments at what point does protection become a curse. Zara watched in frozen horror. Jihoon stood over a fallen guard, his knuckles split and weeping red, his expression softening only when his gaze found hers across the carnage. He was a monster, but he was her monster. The white light of the private medical suite was blinding, a surgical contrast to the dark violence of the youth center. Zara's hands shook as she dipped a silk cloth into a basin of warm, soapy water. Jihoon sat before her, his shirt discarded, his torso a map of old scars and fresh, blooming bruises. The blood on his knuckles had begun to dry, forming a dark, rusted crust that looked like a second skin. As she wiped away the red, the water in the basin turned a sickening floral pink. This was the ritual, the washing of the hands, the cleaning of the monster. You knew, she whispered, her voice a jagged edge in the sterile silence. You knew Sangmin was going to hit the center tonight. Jihoon didn't flinch as she pressed the cloth against a deep cut. I knew he was looking for a vulnerability. I knew he was tracking you. You didn't move, Marcus. You didn't warn me. The realization felt like a physical blow to her diaphragm. You used us as bait to draw him out into the open. Minji stood by the door, her sharp eyes fixed on the hallway. It worked, didn't it? Sangmin is exposed. We have the leverage we needed to end this. The betrayal wasn't a knife in the back. It was the chilling understanding that in Jihoon's world, love didn't exempt you from the game. It just made you a more valuable chess piece. Marcus lay in the next room, sedated and broken, a casualty of a war Zara had accidentally invited him into the moment she asked a stranger for a kiss. I saved him, Zara, Jihoon said, his voice dropping to that smoke over gravel low that used to make her feel safe. I saved you. You put us in the fire just so you could play the hero when you pulled us out, she hissed, the cloth dropping into the basin with a wet splash. Jihoon grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not painful, forcing her to look into the bottomless dark of his eyes. I am a monster, Zara. I never lied about that, but I am your monster. Now, choose. Do you walk out that door into the cold, or do you stay and help me finish this? The Brooklyn docks were a graveyard of rusted iron and frozen salt. The air was a cocktail of diesel, cordite, and the metallic tang of an approaching slaughter. Zara stood in the shadow of a shipping container, her breath hitching in white plumes. In her hand, she clutched a burner phone. Jihoon had given her a digital detonator that would wipe the encrypted servers of Sangmin's offshore accounts the moment the first bullet was fired. Do it now, Zara. Jihoon's voice crackled in her ear, steady as a heartbeat. Take his money, and he has nothing left to pay his soldiers. He becomes just a man. She looked at the screen. One button. If she pressed it, she wasn't just a social worker anymore. She was an accomplice to the dismantling of a criminal empire. She was the ghost in the machine. She thought of Marcus's broken face, of the children at the center who finally had heat because of Jihoon's business. She pressed it. The warehouse erupted. It wasn't like the movies. It was surgical and hideous. Jihoon moved through the fog of gunsmoke like a wraith, his silhouette flickering against the muzzle flashes. He wasn't just fighting for territory. He was a man burning his own world down to build a fortress around her. Blood crusted under his fingernails as he dragged Sangmin toward the pier's edge. The rival boss was screaming, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the churning black water of the East River. You've become a monster for a girl, Sangmin shrieked. Jihoon didn't answer. He looked back at Zara, standing in the shadows. He didn't hide the violence from her anymore. He showed her the cost of her safety. A bullet grazed Jihoon's shoulder, a bright splash of red against his dark coat, a sacrifice he barely acknowledged. We're crossing lines together tonight, loves. If you'd make the same choice to protect the one you love, you know what to do. Hit like if you understand why she destroyed the evidence. Tell me in the comments at what point does the hero become the villain. The silence that followed the gunfire was surgical, engineered, and heavy with the weight of what they had both become. Jihoon walked toward her, the snow turning pink beneath his boots. He took her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away from the blood. She squeezed back. The sirens were a rhythmic, surgical pulse against the New York skyline, drawing closer with every heartbeat. On the edge of the pier, the wind whipped Jihoon's dark hair across his face, his expression a mask of grim finality. Sangmin was gone, swallowed by the black depths of the river, but the vacuum he left behind was already being filled by the flashing lights of the FBI. Jihoon turned to Zara, his hands still stained with the price of her safety, reaching out one last time. The federal agents are 10 minutes away. I have a plane waiting at Teterboro. I can send you back to your life, Zara. I'll scrub your name from every file. You can go back to being the girl who saves children, and I will be the monster you once kissed in a dive bar. You'll be safe. You'll be clean. Zara looked at the city that had once made her feel invisible. She thought of the respectable life that had abandoned her and the monster who had burned a path through the dark just to find her. She didn't see a criminal anymore. She saw the man who had recreated a world for her. I don't want to be clean in a world that's cold, Jihoon, she whispered, stepping into his space, her hand covering the blood on his knuckles. I want to be wherever you are. 1 year later, the air in Jeju Island smelled of salt and ripening halabong oranges. The winter here was soft, a gentle haze compared to the jagged ice of Manhattan. Zara sat on the porch of their secluded villa, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach where a new life kicked rhythmically. Jihoon stepped out from the shadows of the house, his suit replaced by soft linen, though the alertness in his eyes never truly faded. He knelt beside her, pressing a kiss to her palm. He wasn't entirely clean, the shadows still whispered to him from across the ocean, but the darkness was under control. "Merry Christmas, Zara," he murmured. She leaned back, watching the sun dip into the sea. She had accepted the gray. She had chosen the monster, and in the quiet of the island, she realized that some monsters are the only ones worth loving. Thank you for watching, my loves. If this story pulled you into the shadows with me, hit like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts below. Every comment helps this story reach the people who need it. Rest your heart for now because the next story goes even deeper. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.